We kind of describe is the way cavalry charges work. You have an animal that is a prey animal, okay? Horses are prey. So you know, go back geologically or whatever it's called, evolutionary, whatever, they raised on the plains, and bears and tigers and lions and stuff would chase them and kill them. So they learn to run away really fast, stay in a group, and they can kick and do other things for defense. So what men do is they gather those horses and they train them to still run, but run towards something. So you're harnessing the power of that herd. Now a horse like this guy, he probably weighs 1,000, 1,100 pounds. In the day, the men would have been like Eric's size, not quite as big as me, probably 160-pound fellas, and you know, people were smaller back then. Washington was notable because he was like 6'2" or something. So he was, you know, a head taller than most guys. But a lot of these men would have been smaller frame, but they're wielding a 3-foot long steel whip in their hand, and they're riding on the back of something that is moving at about 30 miles an hour when it finally hits folks, and weighs a lot, and if it runs over you, it's probably going to hurt real bad, if not break bones and heads and everything else. So a massed body of horse, not 2 guys, but 100 guys, okay, not much is going to stand up in front of them and let them run over them, okay? So riflemen, for example, you'll see some guys out here with rifles. A rifle is a very accurate hunting weapon. It is a terrible military weapon at this stage because it is slow to load and it cannot accept a bayonet. So the only defense that ground troops have would be regular troops like Continentals or British regulars who have a musket which doesn't shoot very far but shoots frequently. You can load it maybe 4 times a minute and get rounds off. But the nice thing is it can accept about a 14-inch bayonet on the end of it, and you can lean it out like this and you've got a spear. And if you and 100 of your closest friends all get shoulder to shoulder and put that hedgehog spear out, that makes it less likely that horses are going to run over you because they're going to run right into those spears. Where Continentals or British regulars are at great risk is if they have taken casualties, right? So they stand, they fight in 2 ranks usually, and if a cannon's blown out 4 or 5 guys here and other guys have taken, you know, wounds, and their order is starting to break up, they've got gaps in it, or God help them if they turn to leave, that's when the horse love to hit them, okay? Because a horse against a single guy, the horseman's going to win. 50 horses against 50 guys fixed, that's iffy, okay? So in this battle, there's a couple of times you'll probably hear, if you've seen the video or whatever, Morgan has his riflemen, again, men who don't have the ability to fix a bayonet, he sends them out and directs them to shoot at the epaulets, shoot at the officers, and then take casualties among the rank and file. And they do that. They do a good job. Bannister Tarleton's on the other end of this field. He sees a bunch of riflemen shooting, and he decides, I'm going to win this, okay? Because riflemen will not stand up to horse. He takes those 50 English 17th Light Dragoons in red coats, and he sends them tearing across the field against about 300 or 400 riflemen. They see those horsemen coming. In the accounts after the battle, they describe it as 300 horses. 50 horses running, they think it's 300, and they lead. Because remember, they came there on horseback. Their horses are tied up over here, well off the battlefield. They start heading for the horses to get away. Because they can't fight. That one shot with a rifle, it's a minute and a half before you're ready to shoot again. So they have a weak, thin club. They are completely defenseless. William Washington and his 3rd Dragoons are sitting probably back on this hill here. So he sees the British charging the riflemen. He knows that we've got to have those riflemen because that's what's bolstering the Patriot numbers so they can stand up to the British. So he takes his 90 to 110 3rd Dragoons and he charges into the 17th Dragoons. When he hits them from the left side. My sword's on my left, which means I use my right hand. So when you get hit from the left, that's like the worst place to get hit if you're on a horseman, or if you're on a horse, because you can't defend well. They decimated the 17th Light Dragoons. 17th Light Dragoons, that company of them never fought again as a cohesive unit. They knocked guys out of the saddle, they killed some, they captured the rest, they captured most of those wonderful horses, okay? More about that maybe on a different talk. But the main thing they did is they wiped out the 50 men of the 17th Light Dragoons, which allowed the riflemen to get their wits about them. Okay, we're not going to get cut down. They come back into the battle later, and that helps win the day for Daniel Morgan, okay? So we talked a little bit about how the horses move. I can tell you a little bit about equipment. You'll see the British Legion troop is wearing a black helmet. This is what's called japanned leather. So they boil that, put it on a form, paint it, make it really hard, and then he's got bear skin and a crest. Now, I've got white horsehair on a crest. What's that for? So part of that is so that I can tell who's who. Because normally in the 18th century, you did dress up to go fight, okay? You dressed up to go get killed. But the reason you wore a distinctive dress was so that people would know which team you're on, right? But a lot of times when they're marching, they may not be wearing their regimentals, they may be in a hunting frock or whatever, but they typically are going to have their helmets on. And so you can see, is this guy in the 3rd? Is he someone else? So that's part of it. And of course the helmet provides protection from sword blows, as does the leather neck stock, right? Marines are called leather necks, so they wore these when they were on ship because it protected against cutlass blows and things. So he's got his green coat, he's got breeches and boots, he's got a haversack, a sword, a canteen. So he's got what he needs for both his own feeding, what little food he's able to carry. You'll see on his saddle, now both of these saddles are a pattern called the 1858 Elliott Light Dragoon saddle. You see he's got the pistol holsters on the front. This is what's called a nose feed bag. So when we go to feed the horse, if we're able to go to a grist mill and get corn or any other kind of oats or grain, we put it on there, put it on the horse's head so they don't spill it, right? He's got his blanket here. He's got his saddle blanket. The saddle itself, these are very light. You'll notice if you know anything about modern saddlery, not a whole lot's changed in the last 300 years in English saddles. These are what we would now call a close contact saddle, but interestingly, when you put the pistol holsters on there, all of a sudden you have knee rolls. So if you're jumping something, you've actually got something for your knee to go against. The blanket forms a higher cantle, so you end up creating a deeper seat, which is good. Still plenty easy to fall out of, but he's wearing, well, he just broke his halter, but he's got a halter and he's got these reins and bridle. So the bridle is your brakes. So the bit here goes in the horse's mouth and your reins tell it to stop. You can steer these horses, they're, well, some better than others, but they're neck rein to where you can turn left or turn right using just one hand. You're not having to use direct rein. And that's an important part of training because you need that right hand for your pistol, for your sword, or whatever. Now, I said they probably didn't use the pistols in battle, and by and large, that is true. I think they used the pistols for signaling. So one of the roles of the dragoon in the era, obviously fighting, but the dragoons, the light dragoons, and we only had light dragoons here. They have heavies in Europe, but they never had heavy cavalry in the Americas. So, well, at least not in North America. They might have had some in Mexico at some point, but not in the Revolutionary War. The light dragoons were the military police. They were often used as vedettes or pickets. So when the army moves, it's men marching usually, and they don't know what's 200 yards over there because they can't see it. So the horsemen ride out in front and in the rear and on both sides, both to maintain, to be the initial contact with the enemy, so we know where the enemy is, so we can get our men out of a column into a line to where we can actually fight. That takes a little bit of time. But they also round up stragglers, men who were either deserting or unable to keep up for any reason. They are used in the South a lot in this theater as guards for foragers. So you'll see, if you read anything about the Southern Campaign, there's lots of battles that are only 50 to 100 folks engaged total. A lot of those are when people are going out to farms or mills or blacksmith shops or whatever, trying to get supplies, because the army has to eat, right? Was it Napoleon that said an army travels on its stomach? It really does. You know, you got 500 guys, they eat a lot of stuff, and the horses they have eat a lot of stuff. So you got to victual the army, you got to feed the army, and the way you do that, really tough in the backcountry, because there's no towns of any consequence. So you're going out to farms and mills and places like that, and you're taking the food from them, and you might write them a receipt, but you know, nobody ever gets paid on those. So you're basically liberating the things that they needed to live on. So just think, if you will, if the army shows up at your farm and takes your hams and takes your grits and your cornmeal, and it's January, how are you going to make it? There's nowhere to get more of that unless your neighbors share with you. So when the army comes to town, it's bad news, right? Even if it's your army, it's really tough. So if you think about, they talk about how Nathaniel Greene separated his army in the face of the enemy, and how that's usually not done. You want to concentrate your forces. Well, part of the reason is he had to feed them. And it's the rural backcountry of North Carolina. We are now in the absolute Wild West. I mean, in 1781, 50 miles that way is the Cherokee Nation. So we are on the frontier. This is cowboy country. That's why it's the cow pens, right? This is where they drive the cattle out of the mountains and out of the backcountry. They get them here, they collect them, and they drive them down to Granby's Landing on the Howard Gap Road, all the way down to below modern Columbia, put them on flatboats and sell them in Charleston, okay? They drive hogs, cattle, turkeys, wild turkeys they drive. So all of this stuff goes, but that's part of why the cow pens is important. It's important in the Kings Mountain campaign, and it's important in this campaign because everybody for 100 miles around knows where this is. So if they say, meet me at the cow pens, we're gathering at the cow pens, they know, because that's, most of these folks, they're farmers, but they're also, back in these days, they just turned their cattle and hogs loose. They didn't have fencing. They just turned them loose, and then they'd go out and round them up when it's time to go to market and bring them that way. So that's part of why this ground is important. And it's also open because you got people grazing on it. So it's not thick woods like, Carolina backcountry is all woods. So this is open, and it forms a decent battlefield. I've talked a long time. What questions do y'all have? Not all at once. Yes, sir. He was English. He was English. For some reason, I think he's got some Irish in him too. But anyway, I think he's English. His dad dies. He gets his inheritance young, blows it gambling, and somehow either his mom or his uncle, somebody gave him enough money to buy either a cornet or a low-level officer rank in Britain. And then he comes to America, and I'm not sure if his regiment goes. I'm not exactly sure how he gets here. Now, he comes with the military, obviously, but I don't know if his unit was sent here, exactly how he ends up in America. He becomes a favorite of Cornwallis, but, he's not a person of great character. So one of the things that you read about Tarleton, like he's a member of Parliament later in life, but it's all about him. He's always doing stuff to bolster his own reputation. So even the battles where he completely lost, like this one, he somehow tries to put a spin on it. Now this one, nobody believed him because he had the light infantry and they're all captured. So, he only shows up after this battle. The only people that got away, he loses his cannons and he loses all his infantry and he loses the 17th. The only people that get away are members of the British Legion, of whom there's like 200 or 300 that were never committed to the battle. They could have probably turned the battle, but they run away. And there's some theories as to why they may have run away, not least of which they just saw on two different wings groups get annihilated by the Continental Cavalry. But basically they run away. And but even in other battles, he puts a spin on it. And then later, like after the war, even he disparages Cornwallis and some of these other folks, just trying to bolster himself. It's never a good idea to, and I mean, Cornwallis is a lord, right? So, I mean, he's just a petty, I don't think he was noble at all, right? So, biting the hand that feeds you kind of thing, not great. But I do, if I recall, so at Yorktown, Charlton was at Yorktown. And remember, this is gentlemanly warfare. So when the British surrender, most of the officers are invited to the mess with the Patriot officers and the French officers, and they're cordial. Nobody invites Charlton, and there's actually a warrant for Charlton for some of the stuff that he's done. So he is persona non grata, probably the closest. They didn't have war criminals the way we think of it now, but that's the way they thought of him back then. Now, to be fair to Charlton, what's the most important thing for a cavalry commander? Aggression has got to be up there high. So if you look at, and I mentioned there's a lot of these little battles when people are out foraging. Almost every battle in the South has a road running right through it, okay? That's probably true for a lot of places, but armies move on roads, right? They don't just go traipsing through the backcountry, they move on roads. So what happens is you're at a ford or you're coming down a road and you see an opposing force. The first thing Charlton did is say, draw your swords, charge. And whoever charges and hits the hardest is probably going to disperse the other guys. He was very good at that. He, on the Battle of Cowpens, if you read Larry Lawrence Babbitt's book, Devil of a Whipping, it's a great book on this battle. Charlton has been pursuing. He wants to crush Daniel Morgan. That's the whole right wing of Nathaniel Greene's forces in the South. That's why Cornwallis gives him the horse and the light troops. He's got the youngest guys, who can really march. He drives them for like 3 or 4 days on like 2 or 3 hours of sleep, running through Carolina, cross some of these Erie River, this stuff is nasty. It's January, it's muddy, it's cold. These guys are, he's whipping them. We're getting up, they've been marching this morning since like 4. And they show up at this battlefield at light like it's 7. And this whole battle is really fast. It might have taken 15 to 30 minutes. It was over quick. And it was just a disaster for Charlton. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But he was just very aggressive. And, William Washington was actually pretty aggressive too. That's what makes a cavalry commander. You're out there, you got to make split-second decisions. And Charlton didn't do anything to lessen his reputation as a butcher, right? If the guys think the butcher's coming, maybe I don't want to fight so hard, right? That's a good thing for your reputation. Serves him poorly after the war. Other questions, comments, movie quotes? Yes, sir.
So many of the troops, volunteers, and farmers, like say, from the mountains, how do they ever have time to train?
So there's different kinds of troops. And I'm sure you remember, Baron von Steuben and these folks at Valley Forge, where they bring in these Europeans to train the Continentals. So this is January of 1781. And one of the big misconceptions about the American Revolutionary War is the British all stood in lines and read, and the Americans hid behind trees and shot them. Oh, how dumb are the British? Well, first of all, that rarely actually happened. It does happen to a degree on the march at Lexington Concord, but they're actually, the British trying to go somewhere. They're not facing a formed enemy. They're getting sniped at, okay? That's not mostly how they fought. Washington throughout this time wanted an army, a force that could stand toe-to-toe with the British and slug it out. And so that's what they trained these Continentals to do. So the Continentals you have here are Delaware and Maryland, and then you got a lot of Virginia militia who had been Continentals, but were not still in the Continental Force, but they had experience fighting. And then you had farmers, and the farmers are men like me. I'm 56, right? So I go out and I say, well, I'm going to fight for 3 months, and then I'm going home. So middle-aged guys. There might have been some regular-age guys, but probably younger kids. And mostly they're staying home as much as they can because there's always the threat of Indians. There's also roving Crown forces or Tory forces, okay? In fact, shortly before this battle, and one of the things that nobody even knows about, but there's a battle called Hammond's Store, and it's fought on December 30th down near Lawrence. And there's a group of 300 horse rangers. They're Georgia horse rangers. These are a militia unit out of Georgia, and they're Tory. And they are raising Cain in the backcountry. They're burning farms down. So the militia will not leave their home, right? You know, you got your dad and a couple of older kids. They stay home to where they can defend the farm against these horse rangers. So William McCall, who is a colonel of the state militia dragoons in South Carolina, gets information about where these horse rangers are, and they're camped at a place called Hammond's Store. And he and William Washington with the 3rd go after them. They march like 22 miles or 28 miles over the course of a day, and they find the horse rangers in the morning. They attack them when they're getting up making breakfast and just absolutely dissipate them, right? They run away. That's on December 30th. Just under 3 weeks later, they have enough militia to fight this battle. Had it not been for Hammond's Store and wiping out the horse rangers, Daniel Morgan might not have had 400 or 500 of those militia that came here. Because if you look at the numbers, they're kind of equal. And to be fair, a rifleman, a backcountry militiaman who's not a trained soldier, you know, they're not really even expected to be able to go toe-to-toe with a regular, right? This guy kills for a living. This is what he does. So the British troops tend to be superior, but the core Continentals, the Maryland, the Virginia, there's North Carolinians here too, but the Maryland and Delaware troops who are here as Continentals, some of the Virginia line, Morgan knew he could rely on them to slug it out, just stand, 60 yards away and shoot at each other with all the carnage that comes from that. So Morgan's an ex-rifleman. He had fought in the French and Indian War. He suffered from gout and some other things, so he's really, even at 60, he wasn't all that old, but he was kind of beat up. But he asked the rifleman, give me 2 fires. I think most of them gave him 1. Shoot twice and you're done. That's all you got to do. Just give me 2 shots and you can retire. And that's kind of what they did. So that's when the 17th chases them off the field. But the idea being, if I can just get some lead down range and kill some of the officers to weaken the British, I think I can take them, when we go toe-to-toe. So, and again, some of it's equipment, but the Continentals were trained. They marched, they trained, and they were veterans. I mean, a lot of these guys had fought up north. Some of them might have been paroled and, you've been captured and paroled and gone back into service, but yeah, good question, though.
What was the impact of the British East India? The fact that most of the British forces were locked up in India.
Or the islands.
Famine in India.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, first of all, when the French come in on the American side, 77, something like that. It becomes a world war. So the French are tied in with the Spanish too. So Spanish colonies, French islands, and you got to think about what was produced in America. I mean, why did the British lose this? Well, partly because it wasn't that valuable to them at the time. They didn't want to lose it. You never want to lose some of your colonies, but we were producing tobacco, which was great value, indigo, rice, naval stores, no manufacturing of any consequence. It's all raw materials coming out of here. No cotton of any consequence yet because they didn't have the cotton gin, so they weren't doing the cotton. So it was dyes, tobacco, a few other things. But the islands are producing sugar. That's super valuable. Rice as well, and some other things. So, yeah, rum. Those Caribbean islands have greater value, and there's naval actions going on between the British and the French that are sort of away from here, and it's part of a greater world war. And I mean, to be fair, we probably would not have succeeded had it not been for the French, because they recognized this. So until you're recognized by another country, you're just a rebellion. So had it not been for French money, French equipment, and ultimately French troops and the French Navy, I mean, it might have simmered for a long time, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere. I don't think we would have achieved independence, because the British would ultimately just closed all the ports, and you wouldn't have any external trade, you know. But that isn't how it happened. And the British also, I mean, they committed. I've gotten this